The moment that defines everything in this story isn't loud, dramatic, or chaotic in the way most people expect betrayal to look. It's quiet, controlled, almost ordinary on the surface. That's exactly why it works so powerfully as a hook. When the narrator says his daughter told him to leave his own house, without even looking him in the eyes, the emotional impact doesn't come from shouting or insults. It comes from absence. Absence of eye contact, absence of hesitation, absence of emotional connection. That detail signals something deeper than a simple argument. It suggests a complete emotional disconnect, and that immediately creates a strong curiosity gap in the audience's mind. People instinctively ask, what happened between them that led to this point? Another critical element is positioning. The daughter is not alone. She is standing behind her boyfriend. That physical placement carries psychological weight. It shows alignment, loyalty, and a shift in authority. Without explicitly explaining it, the scene communicates that the father has been replaced in her hierarchy of trust. The audience doesn't need exposition to understand this. The visual implication is enough. This is a classic storytelling tactic where physical arrangement reflects emotional dynamics. It immediately frames the boyfriend as a rival figure without needing confrontation yet. The language used in the hook is also intentionally restrained. Phrases like, "I think it's best if you go," are not aggressive on the surface. They are polite, almost reasonable. But that's exactly what makes them painful. This is indirect rejection disguised as rational decision-making. In psychological terms, it creates cognitive dissonance. The words sound calm, but the meaning is devastating. That contrast keeps viewers engaged because it feels real. In real life, the most painful moments are rarely theatrical. They are often delivered in controlled, almost detached tones. The narrator's reaction is equally important. He doesn't argue. He doesn't shout. He doesn't try to defend himself. Instead, he quietly picks up his bag and leaves. This is a deliberate subversion of expectation. Most viewers anticipate confrontation at this point, so when it doesn't happen, it creates tension rather than resolving it. Silence becomes a narrative tool. It signals that something is being held back. The audience senses that the narrator knows more than he is revealing, which strengthens engagement through an open loop. That open loop is reinforced immediately afterward with the line about the boyfriend having crossed a line that he could never come back from. This is where the hook transitions from emotional pain to suspense. Up until that point, the story appears to be about a father being rejected by his daughter. But this line reframes the entire situation. It introduces the idea that there is hidden information, something serious enough to shift the power dynamic later. Importantly, the story does not explain what that secret is, it only hints at it. This is a classic retention technique, providing just enough information to create intrigue without satisfying it. The phrase, "I had been waiting for the right moment to prove it," adds another layer. It suggests patience, control, and intention. The narrator is no longer just a victim. He becomes an observer, someone who is quietly preparing for something. This shift is subtle but crucial. It prevents the story from feeling one-dimensional. Instead of a helpless character, the audience now sees someone who may be underestimated. That perceived underestimation is a powerful driver of engagement because it sets up the possibility of a future reversal. Emotionally, the hook operates on multiple levels at once. There is immediate pain from the daughter's betrayal. There is discomfort from the boyfriend's silent presence. There is curiosity about the hidden truth. And there is anticipation of eventual justice. These layers ensure that different types of viewers remain engaged. Those drawn to emotional drama, those interested in psychological tension, and those looking for a payoff. Another important detail is the specificity of small actions. The daughter packing his things. The father picking up his old leather bag. These are not random details. They ground the scene in reality. Specific objects make the moment feel lived in rather than scripted. The leather bag, in particular, symbolizes history and routine. It suggests that the father is used to carrying his life quietly, without fuss. When he picks it up, it reinforces his character as someone who endures rather than reacts. The pacing of the hook also plays a technical role. Short sentences are used to control rhythm. Each line lands separately, giving the audience time to process the emotional weight. This creates a natural pause effect, similar to how people recall painful memories in real life, fragmented, deliberate, and heavy. It prevents the story from feeling rushed and allows tension to build even within a small word count. There's also an implicit theme introduced here: replacement and invisibility. The father is not just being asked to leave a house, he is being removed from a role. The house represents more than property. It represents authority, belonging, and identity. By being told to leave, he is being stripped of all three. This symbolic layer deepens the impact without requiring explicit explanation. From a structural perspective, the hook achieves three essential objectives simultaneously. First, it establishes conflict, the daughter versus the father, influenced by the boyfriend. Second, it introduces mystery, the secret the boyfriend is hiding. Third, it sets up a future payoff, the narrator's intention to reveal the truth. These three elements form the backbone of high-retention storytelling. If any one of them were missing, the hook would feel incomplete. The decision to keep the narrator emotionally controlled is particularly strategic. Instead of expressing anger or desperation, he remains calm and observant. This creates contrast with the emotional situation, making his character more intriguing. Viewers begin to question why he is so composed. That question itself becomes another curiosity gap. It subtly signals that there is more to him than meets the eye. Finally, the hook leverages relatability. While not everyone has been thrown out of their home, many people understand the feeling of being dismissed, replaced, or underestimated by someone close. That emotional universality allows the audience to connect quickly. Once that connection is established, the introduction of mystery ensures they stay to find out what happens next. The second section works because it builds a grounded, believable baseline before anything dramatic fully unfolds. Without this foundation, the later betrayal and reversal would feel exaggerated or artificial. The narrator is positioned as an ordinary man with a routine that is almost predictable to the minute, and that predictability is intentional. When someone's life feels stable and uneventful, even small disruptions become more noticeable and emotionally impactful. The audience needs to understand what normal looks like for him so they can later recognize exactly how and when that normal begins to break. His job is a key part of that setup. Working as a building maintenance supervisor is not glamorous, and that's precisely the point. It signals reliability, consistency, and a behind-the-scenes role. He fixes problems others don't even notice. This parallels his personality. Quiet, functional, and largely invisible. There's a thematic alignment between what he does professionally and how he exists personally. This kind of alignment strengthens character authenticity because it feels natural rather than constructed. It also subtly foreshadows his later competence. Someone who maintains systems for a living is not careless or unaware. He just doesn't draw attention to himself. The absence of his wife introduces emotional context without turning the story into a tragedy too early. Her passing explains why the relationship with his daughter carries more weight, and also why there may be emotional gaps between them. He admits he wasn't good with emotions, which is a critical detail. Instead of portraying himself as a perfect parent, he acknowledges a limitation. That honesty increases credibility. Viewers are more likely to trust a narrator who recognizes his own shortcomings. It also prevents the daughter's later behavior from feeling completely unjustified. The tension in their relationship didn't appear out of nowhere. It developed over time. The father's way of expressing care is practical rather than emotional. He provides, he maintains the home, he ensures stability. In his mind, that equals love. But the story quietly suggests that this wasn't enough for his daughter. This creates a subtle layer of emotional conflict beneath the surface. It's not loud or confrontational, but it's present. The audience can sense that there is a disconnect between intention and perception. He believes he did his part, while she may have felt something missing. That gap becomes important later when she aligns with someone else who appears more expressive or attentive. Routine plays a major role in reinforcing the sense of normal life. Specific details like waking up at 6, drinking black coffee, leaving at the same time every day, these are not filler details. They create rhythm. They make the character feel real, because real lives are built on repetition. This repetition also serves a structural purpose. When the routine is eventually disrupted, the contrast becomes sharper. The audience subconsciously registers the change because they've already internalized what usual looks like. The daughter's gradual emotional distance is handled with restraint. She doesn't suddenly become hostile or disrespectful. Instead, she slowly withdraws, eating in her room, spending more time on her phone, engaging less in conversation. This progression is realistic. Relationships rarely collapse overnight, they erode. By showing this slow drift, the story avoids melodrama and builds a more credible emotional arc. It also creates a sense of quiet loss. The father doesn't confront it aggressively. He rationalizes it as a normal part of growing up. That rationalization is important because it shows his tendency to avoid conflict, which later allows larger issues to develop unchecked. When the boyfriend is introduced, the contrast is immediate but not exaggerated. He is polished, confident, socially smooth, qualities that stand in opposition to the father's understated nature. This contrast is not just about personality, it's about perception. The boyfriend represents a version of masculinity that is more visible and outwardly appealing. especially to someone like the daughter who may be seeking emotional engagement. The father, by comparison, seems outdated or less exciting, even if he is fundamentally more stable. The first interaction between the father and the boyfriend is carefully constructed. The boyfriend is respectful, but the respect feels rehearsed. This detail is subtle but critical. It plants the seed that his behavior may not be genuine. However, it doesn't confirm anything yet. This is how suspicion is introduced without breaking realism. The audience is given just enough to question, but not enough to conclude. Meanwhile, the daughter's reaction, laughing, appearing happy, adds complexity. For the first time in a long while, she seems emotionally alive. That creates a conflict for the audience as well. Even if something feels off about the boyfriend, he is clearly bringing out a positive change in her, which makes the situation less straightforward. The father's decision to accept the boyfriend, despite his discomfort, is rooted in his priorities. He values his daughter's happiness over his own instincts. This is a crucial character trait. It shows that he is not passive out of weakness, but out of care. He is willing to tolerate uncertainty if it means preserving her sense of happiness. This decision also sets up future consequences. By not acting on early discomfort, he allows the situation to develop further, which increases the stakes later. Another important element is the internal contradiction within the father. He senses that something is off, but he cannot articulate it. This creates internal tension. It's not just about external events, it's about his own uncertainty. That uncertainty keeps the narrative grounded, because it reflects real human behavior. People often feel something is wrong before they can explain why. By capturing that feeling, the story becomes more immersive. The pacing of this section is deliberately slower than the hook. This is necessary because it allows the audience to settle into the world of the story. High-retention storytelling is not just about constant intensity, it's about controlled escalation. If everything is dramatic from the beginning, the audience becomes desensitized. By starting with a calm, detailed setup, the story creates room for tension to grow naturally. Small observational details also contribute to realism. The way the daughter interacts with her phone, the father's consistent schedule, the boyfriend's polished demeanor, these are everyday elements that make the narrative believable. They prevent the story from feeling staged or exaggerated. Instead, it feels like something that could happen in any ordinary household. This section also establishes the theme of underestimation. The father is presented as someone who blends into the background. He doesn't demand attention, and he doesn't assert authority aggressively. This makes it easier for others to overlook him or misjudge him. That perception becomes important later when the story shifts. For now, it remains subtle, but it is clearly embedded in how he is described and how he behaves. By the end of this part, the audience has a clear understanding of three things: who the narrator is, what his relationship with his daughter looks like, and how the boyfriend enters that dynamic. Nothing explosive has happened yet, but the groundwork is solid. The emotional tone, the character dynamics, and the underlying tension are all in place, creating a stable platform for the story to build on as it moves forward into more complex and revealing developments. This part of the story is where interpersonal dynamics become more visible, but still not fully confrontational. It operates in a space where behavior hasn't crossed into outright conflict yet, but the underlying imbalance is becoming harder to ignore. The key here is gradual escalation through subtle behavioral shifts rather than dramatic incidents. The boyfriend's presence transitions from occasional visitor to embedded figure in the household, and that shift happens without formal agreement or acknowledgement. That lack of explicit consent is important because it reflects how boundaries are often eroded in real life, not through one big decision, but through a series of small, unchallenged steps. The boyfriend's politeness at the beginning is carefully constructed to appear genuine while carrying an undertone of calculation. He greets the father, offers help, asks questions, and maintains a surface-level respect that would make it difficult to criticize him openly. This creates a psychological trap. If the father reacts negatively, he risks appearing unreasonable because, on the surface, the boyfriend hasn't done anything wrong. This dynamic is common in manipulative personalities. They maintain plausible deniability while subtly shifting control. The father senses this inconsistency, but because it is not overt, he cannot easily justify confronting it. That ambiguity sustains tension. The daughter's role in this phase is equally critical. She becomes the buffer between the two men, but not in a neutral way. She consistently interprets the boyfriend's behavior in a positive light, often dismissing the father's discomfort as overreaction. This creates a misalignment of perception. The father experiences unease, while the daughter frames everything as normal or even beneficial. This misalignment deepens the father's isolation within his own home. He is no longer just physically present, he is emotionally sidelined. The audience begins to see that the conflict is not just between individuals, but between interpretations of reality. The boyfriend's integration into the household is marked by incremental boundary violations. Sitting in the father's chair, using his tools without asking, changing the television channel. These actions are minor in isolation, but collectively they signal a shift in ownership and authority. These are territorial behaviors. They communicate, without words, that the boyfriend is becoming comfortable occupying space that does not belong to him. The absence of immediate correction allows these behaviors to normalize. Over time, what would have once felt inappropriate begins to feel routine, and that normalization is what makes the eventual conflict more impactful. The father's response to these changes is restraint. He observes rather than reacts. This is not passivity in a simplistic sense, it is a deliberate choice shaped by his personality and priorities. He avoids confrontation because he understands that pushing too hard could push his daughter further away. This creates internal conflict. He is aware that something is wrong, but he is also aware that addressing it directly could damage his already fragile relationship with her. That tension between awareness and restraint is a key driver of engagement because it mirrors real human dilemmas where there is no clear, risk-free option. Language plays a significant role in how tension is conveyed. The daughter's repeated use of phrases like, "It's not a big deal," minimizes the father's concerns and subtly invalidates his perspective. This is a form of soft dismissal. It doesn't attack him directly, but it reduces the legitimacy of his feelings. Over time, this kind of dismissal can be more damaging than open conflict because it erodes confidence in one's own judgment. The father begins to question whether he is overreacting, even though his instincts are signaling otherwise. This internal doubt adds another layer of psychological complexity. The boyfriend's behavior also includes an element of observation. He appears to study the father, learning his habits, his routines, and his responses. This is not explicitly stated, but it is implied through the father's perception that something feels rehearsed. That perception suggests that the boyfriend is not just interacting naturally, but strategically. He adapts his behavior depending on the situation, presenting himself as helpful and respectful when necessary, while gradually asserting control in less obvious ways. This duality is what makes him a credible antagonist. He is not openly aggressive, he is controlled and calculated. The progression from visitor to resident is a critical turning point, even though it is presented without drama. The boyfriend's belongings appear in the house, his presence becomes constant, and eventually, it feels as though he has always been there. This shift alters the power structure of the household. The father is no longer the sole authority figure. He is now one of three people sharing space, and arguably the least influential of the three. The lack of a formal conversation about this change highlights the father's diminishing role in decision-making. He is informed, not consulted. The emotional tone of this section is one of quiet displacement. The father is not expelled yet, but he is being edged out psychologically. His routines are interrupted, his space is shared without permission, and his authority is subtly undermined. This creates a sense of unease that builds gradually. The audience can see where things are heading, even if the characters do not fully acknowledge it yet. This anticipation is a key component of retention because it keeps viewers engaged, waiting for the moment when the tension will finally surface. Another important aspect is the consistency of the father's perspective. He does not exaggerate or dramatize events. He reports them in a straightforward manner, which increases credibility. The audience is not being told what to feel. They are being shown a sequence of behaviors and left to interpret them. This approach is effective because it respects the audience's ability to recognize patterns. When viewers arrive at the conclusion that something is wrong on their own, the engagement is stronger than if the story simply declared it. The theme of underestimation continues to develop here. The boyfriend appears to view the father as non-threatening, someone who can be gradually displaced without resistance. The daughter, intentionally or not, reinforces this perception by siding with the boyfriend's interpretations. This sets up an imbalance where the father is seen as less relevant, less authoritative, and less aware. That perception becomes a strategic advantage later. But at this stage, it contributes to the tension, because the audience knows something the characters do not fully acknowledge. The father is paying attention, even if he is not reacting. By the end of this section, the household dynamic has fundamentally changed. The boyfriend is no longer an outsider, he is embedded. The daughter's loyalty has shifted, at least in practice if not consciously. The father remains present, but his influence has diminished. The tension is no longer subtle in its existence, only in its expression. It is clear that the situation cannot remain stable indefinitely, and that inevitability drives the narrative forward as the story moves toward the point where suspicion begins to solidify into something more concrete. This stage of the story marks the transition from vague discomfort to active suspicion. Up to this point, the father has only been operating on instinct. He senses inconsistencies, notices subtle boundary violations, and feels displaced within his own home. But he has no concrete evidence that anything is wrong beyond his emotional unease. The fourth key point changes that by introducing the first moment where instinct collides with observable behavior. This is a critical shift because it transforms the narrative from emotional family tension into psychological suspense. The importance of timing cannot be overstated here. The father comes home early on a Tuesday, and this detail matters because it disrupts routine. Stories often rely on disrupted patterns to reveal hidden truths. The father's life is built on consistency, same wake-up time, same work schedule, same predictable rhythm. Because of that, his unexpected early arrival creates an opportunity to witness something he was never supposed to see. The power of this moment lies in its realism. Hidden agendas are often exposed not through elaborate investigation but through accidental timing. The audience recognizes this as plausible, which strengthens immersion. The fact that the house is supposed to be empty is another subtle but essential element. It establishes expectation before immediately violating it. When the father notices the boyfriend's car outside, that expectation is broken. This triggers the first clear signal that something is unusual. Suspense often begins with small deviations from what should be normal. The car itself becomes symbolic. It is a physical marker of presence where presence should not exist. Before any words are overheard, tension has already begun to build because the father, and by extension the audience, knows something is off. The father entering quietly is also significant. He is not sneaking intentionally, which preserves his moral neutrality. He is simply arriving home. This matters because it avoids making him seem intrusive or suspicious by nature. Instead, the story frames the discovery as accidental, which makes what he hears feel more authentic and less manufactured. The tension comes not from deliberate spying, but from unintended exposure. The overheard conversation is where suspicion crystallizes. The phrases, "We can't rush it," "You just have to trust me," and "You said it would be simple," are carefully chosen because they are incomplete. They provide context without explanation. This incompleteness is what makes them effective. If the dialogue were too specific, the mystery would collapse too early. If it were too vague, it would fail to create meaningful tension. Instead, these lines strike a balance that allows the audience to infer that some kind of plan is underway, while leaving the exact nature of that plan unclear. The ambiguity of these phrases is psychologically powerful because humans are wired to seek closure. When we encounter incomplete information, our minds naturally try to fill the gaps. This creates engagement because the audience becomes an active participant in constructing possibilities. What are they discussing? Why can't it be rushed? What is supposed to be simple? These unanswered questions generate curiosity and propel the narrative forward. The immediate silence when the father enters is another crucial detail. Silence can reveal more than words. If the conversation had continued naturally, the father might dismiss what he heard as harmless. But the abrupt stop signals concealment. It communicates that the speakers know their discussion would not withstand scrutiny. This reaction validates the father's unease without requiring explicit confirmation. The boyfriend's response, smiling and casually greeting him, is equally important. It demonstrates control. Instead of panic or visible discomfort, he quickly adopts a calm exterior. This suggests confidence, adaptability, and social intelligence. He is able to recover instantly, which implies experience with deception, or at least comfort with masking intention. This controlled response contrasts with the daughter's unease, which is more visible and therefore more revealing. The daughter's discomfort is critical because it introduces emotional complexity. If she were completely calm, the audience might assume innocence. Her tension suggests awareness, even if partial. This creates uncertainty around her role. Is she complicit, manipulated, conflicted? The story does not answer these questions immediately, which is exactly why they work. They deepen the psychological stakes by complicating the daughter's position. The father's question, "Everything okay?" is deceptively simple. On the surface, it is casual. But beneath that simplicity is a test. He has given them an opportunity to respond honestly or reveal further inconsistency. Their quick dismissal of the conversation as "school stuff" fails that test because it does not align with the urgency and tone he overheard. This mismatch between observed behavior and verbal explanation strengthens suspicion. What makes this moment effective is the father's restraint. He does not challenge the explanation directly. He does not accuse or interrogate. He accepts the answer outwardly while internally registering the discrepancy. This restraint preserves tension. Immediate confrontation would force answers too soon and collapse the suspense. By holding back, he allows uncertainty to linger and grow. The sleepless night that follows is an essential psychological bridge. Suspicion is rarely resolved in the moment it appears. Instead, it lingers, replaying in the mind. The repeated phrases echoing in his thoughts illustrate how unresolved information gains emotional weight over time. This internal repetition mirrors real human cognition. When something feels wrong but cannot yet be explained, the mind circles it repeatedly. This sleeplessness also marks a shift in the father's role. Until now, he has been primarily reactive, observing events as they unfold. Here, he becomes analytical. The moment he decides to pay closer attention, he transitions from passive participant to active investigator. This shift changes the narrative energy. The audience senses that the story is entering a new phase, one where hidden patterns will begin to surface. The line about paying attention, not as a father, but as someone who knew what it looked like when a plan was already in motion, is especially significant because it hints at a deeper dimension to the narrator. It suggests expertise or experience not yet fully revealed. This creates another curiosity gap. How does he know this? What part of his past gives him this perspective? By introducing this layer without explaining it, the story simultaneously advances current tension and plants seeds for future revelation. Thematically, this section is about awakening awareness. The father's emotional discomfort evolves into informed suspicion. This is the moment he stops rationalizing what he feels and begins trusting his instincts. That trust is vital because it sets the stage for every action that follows. From a structural standpoint, this point serves as the story's pivot. The earlier sections establish relationships and tension, but this is where the central mystery formally emerges. It provides the first concrete indication that the conflict is larger than interpersonal disrespect. There is now a hidden agenda, and the audience knows the father is beginning to uncover it. The emotional resonance comes from the quietness of the discovery. There is no dramatic revelation, no explosive argument, no overt threat, just a few overheard words, an abrupt silence, and a lingering sense that something is deeply wrong. This understated approach feels more authentic than overt drama, because it mirrors how real suspicion often begins, with fragments, inconsistencies, and instincts that refuse to go away. This stage is where the narrative shifts from suspicion to strategic awareness, and that distinction matters. Up to this point, the father has been reacting internally, observing, questioning, and trying to make sense of inconsistencies. Now, he crosses into a different cognitive mode. He is no longer just noticing irregularities, he is interpreting them through a structured lens shaped by past experience. That shift transforms the story from emotional tension into calculated positioning. The revelation about his background is central here, but it is handled with restraint rather than spectacle. He doesn't present himself as extraordinary or heroic. Instead, he simply states that he spent years in corporate security, dealing with internal investigations and fraud detection. The specificity of that experience is important. It grounds his competence in a realistic domain. Corporate security is not glamorous, but it is methodical, detail-oriented, and rooted in pattern recognition. This aligns perfectly with the behaviors he has been displaying: quiet observation, patience, and reluctance to act without sufficient information. The audience retroactively understands that his earlier restraint was not just emotional hesitation, it was part of how he operates. This is also where the concept of silent power becomes explicit. The father has knowledge and skills that no one else in the house is aware of. That asymmetry creates narrative tension. The daughter and the boyfriend both perceive him as passive and uninformed, but the audience now knows that this perception is flawed. This gap between how a character is seen and who they actually are is one of the most effective tools in storytelling because it sets up a future reversal. The audience begins to anticipate the moment when that hidden competence will surface. His analysis of the boyfriend's behavior becomes more precise in this section. Earlier, the unease was intuitive, something felt off but couldn't be clearly defined. Now, he starts identifying specific inconsistencies. The boyfriend's schedule lacks coherence, his communication patterns are controlled, and his demeanor shifts depending on context. These observations are not random, they reflect a trained approach to behavioral assessment. Instead of relying on emotional reactions, he is mapping patterns. This gives the story a procedural feel, almost like an investigation unfolding quietly within a domestic setting. The mention of micro-behaviors is particularly important because it signals a deeper level of scrutiny. Micro-behaviors are subtle, often unconscious actions, changes in tone, timing, posture, or response patterns that reveal underlying intent. By referencing this, the story elevates the father's perception beyond that of an average observer. He is not just noticing what the boyfriend does, He is interpreting how and why he does it. This adds credibility to his growing certainty that something is wrong. Another key aspect is the boyfriend's dual presentation. Publicly, he is charming and composed. Privately, he is controlled and calculated. This duality is a hallmark of manipulative behavior, and the father recognizes it. The contrast between these two modes reinforces the idea that the boyfriend is performing rather than being authentic. Performance requires awareness of an audience, which implies intention. The father understands that he is being managed, not engaged with genuinely. The laptop moment is the turning point within this section. It introduces tangible evidence without turning the story into overt surveillance or invasion of privacy. The father does not hack into the system or search extensively. He simply notices an open file. This preserves his ethical position while still advancing the plot. The realism of this moment is crucial. It feels plausible that someone might leave a laptop open briefly, and it feels equally plausible that a trained observer would recognize the significance of what is on the screen within seconds. The content of the file is deliberately specific but not overly technical. Property records, a pending transfer review, incomplete authorization. These elements are enough to indicate intent without overwhelming the audience with legal jargon. The key is clarity. The audience immediately understands that the boyfriend is attempting to gain control over the house through formal channels. This transforms the narrative from emotional betrayal to calculated exploitation. The incompleteness of the authorization is also significant. It shows that the plan is in progress but not finalized. This timing creates opportunity. If the transfer were already complete, the story would shift into damage control. Instead, the father is positioned at a moment where intervention is still possible. This reinforces the importance of patience. He has discovered the plan early enough to respond strategically rather than reactively. The father's reaction to this discovery defines his character more than the discovery itself. He does not confront the boyfriend immediately. He does not reveal what he knows. Instead, he chooses to wait. This decision is rooted in his understanding of how investigations work. Acting too early can alert the other party and cause them to adapt or conceal evidence. By remaining silent, he allows the boyfriend to continue operating under the assumption that his actions are unnoticed. This creates a controlled environment where more information can surface. This approach introduces the concept of playing along. The father is no longer just observing. He is participating in the situation with awareness. He allows events to unfold while maintaining an internal advantage. This dynamic is psychologically engaging because it creates dramatic irony. The audience knows that the father knows, but the other characters do not. This imbalance generates anticipation. Viewers begin to watch not just for what happens, but for how and when the truth will be revealed. The phrase about not flipping the board, but letting the other player think they are winning encapsulates this strategy. It frames the situation as a game of positioning rather than confrontation. This metaphor is effective because it simplifies a complex dynamic into something intuitive. In strategic games, premature moves often lead to loss, while patience and timing lead to control. The father is choosing the latter. There is also an emotional layer beneath the strategy. Despite discovering the boyfriend's intentions, the father does not immediately expose him to his daughter. This suggests that his decisions are not driven purely by logic. There is still a protective instinct at play. He may be hoping that the situation resolves without causing her harm, or that she recognizes the truth on her own. This hesitation adds depth to his character. He is not cold or detached, he is balancing strategy with care. The tension in this section comes from restraint. The audience knows that a significant threat exists, and they know that the father is capable of addressing it. But they also see that he is choosing not to act immediately. This delay is what sustains engagement. Immediate action would resolve the conflict too quickly. By extending the timeline, the story allows stakes to build and consequences to become more meaningful. Structurally, this point serves as the bridge between discovery and confrontation. It provides the information necessary for the later payoff while maintaining uncertainty about how that payoff will unfold. The audience now understands the nature of the conflict, but they do not yet know how it will be resolved. This combination of clarity and uncertainty is what keeps attention focused. Another important function of this section is redefining the power dynamic. On the surface, the boyfriend appears to be gaining control, integrating into the household, influencing the daughter, and initiating legal processes. But beneath the surface, the father now holds the informational advantage. Power shifts from visible authority to hidden knowledge. This inversion is subtle but critical because it sets up the eventual reversal in a way that feels earned rather than sudden. The narrative also reinforces the theme of underestimation. The boyfriend's plan relies on the assumption that the father is unaware and incapable of recognizing what is happening. This assumption is his vulnerability. The father's quiet demeanor has led others to misjudge him, and he uses that misjudgment to his advantage. This is a recurring motif that gains strength here, because it is no longer just implied. It is actively shaping the outcome of events. By the end of this section, the story has fully transitioned into a strategic phase. The father is no longer uncertain, and the audience is no longer guessing about the nature of the threat. The focus shifts from what is happening to how it will be handled. The tension becomes more controlled, more deliberate, and more anticipatory, setting the stage for a confrontation that is not driven by impulse but by preparation and timing.